Welcome to KPMG's Reframing Sustainability panel. My name's Richard Andrews. I'm the head of ESG for KPMG in the UK. So I lead a team of about 300 professionals helping clients be more responsible and more sustainable. And we are really pleased to be the diamond sponsor for Reset Connect this year. And that's such a big and important part of London Climate Action Week. I'm delighted to be joined today on this panel by Juliet Davenport, former CEO of Good Energy and on the board of the Crown Estate, amongst many other interests. Hannah Harrison, the Chief Sustainability Officer for WPP. Sasha Sedan, Director of Sustainability at the FCA. And Ingrid Holmes, who's the Deputy CEO of the Green Finance Institute. So they'll give some opening remarks in a moment, and then we've got some prepared questions, but hopefully a good time for Q&A across the audience. But first, why have we got a Reframing Sustainability panel? We launched a report yesterday looking at reframing sustainability, and largely because we often see the discussion around sustainability set in contrast to commerciality. And yet what we're increasingly seeing is that those two should go hand in hand, and in fact do go hand in hand. So the report we launched is looking at the value that sustainability brings and how that is at the core of a lot of organisations and should be at the core of how organisations go forward. It's an exciting time. There are a lot of different voices out there at the moment. I was at the Net Zero summit yesterday, and the word I kept hearing, and maybe it's because it's our report, was we need to reframe the conversation to think about the value and how sustainability goes hand in hand with value to our people, to our planet, and to corporations. So those are some thoughts from me, but I'd love to hear from our panel. Juliet, give us some thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me today. It is a little bit like being in a silent disco, this. It's very exciting. I keep wondering whether everybody's going to get up and start dancing. So my name is Juliet Davenport. I set a company called Good Energy up about 25 years ago, really with a purpose to look at climate change. And I came into this with really an environmental lens and quite a narrow environmental lens. And it was over the time of running the company that I kind of discovered all these other lenses that you could look at a business through. And at each stage, because we started with an environmental lens, obviously people would then come to me and say, so how should we get to work? Or how should we go to a business meeting? And do we carry on that environmental lens through that? Where is the money that our pension is going towards? How is that invested? Should that be carrying on through that? So actually, Good Energy for me was a bit of a journey of discovery through ESG. And what was really interesting about it is that every stage going through it was quite often driven by the people who worked at Good Energy. But also it was driven, therefore it became a business imperative. It got integrated within the business. And it became sort of just matter of fact how we did things. And each time you would kind of look at something, you would go, well, what does that look like from a people point of view? What does it look like from an investment point of view? What does it look like from a brand point of view? And then how can we kind of justify making this investment? And so it never was seen as a cost. And I guess what surprised me when I left Good Energy and then became part of boards of different organizations was how sustainability is always tends to be perceived through this lens of cost, which is quite interesting because for me, actually, when you investigate a company, and I did a bit of research into sort of food companies for a while, and then obviously working the Crown Estate, we've seen a lot of things in property. And actually, if you just look at a business through a financial lens, you are completely missing half the business. And actually, you need both a financial lens, I think an environmental lens, and a social lens. And I kind of see it like this 3-dimensional set of parameters that actually, if you're going to run a really effective company where people want to come and work, which means that your cost to hire and your churn rates of your people is much lower, and your performance of your people is higher, and that delivers environmentally, which tends to then feed through to your brand and to your customer, then you need a sweet spot where those three come together. And actually, quite often, if you look at it through one lens, you discover something that has an impact on another. There was a bread company that I talked to who had a packing machine, and both packing machines were working perfectly well, and they were both packing. And to all intents and purposes, from a point of view of the output, it looked normal. As soon as you did an energy lens through it, so they were looking at B Corps, so they had to look at their CO2 emissions, they worked out that one of the packing machines, the seal on the bottom had gone, and it was using double the amount of energy of the other one. They would never have picked that up by just looking at the physical product output. They had to pick it up by looking at it through an environmental lens.
That's a great example. Hannah, how do you see it from where you sit?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Harrison. I am Chief Sustainability Officer of WPP. I've never spoken on a panel with headphones on. It's a bit disconcerting. And we are a marketing and communications company. We call ourselves a creative transformation company, and we operate in 100 countries around the world and work with clients across every sector. And I think at the moment what we're hearing from a lot of our clients and what we're feeling ourselves is it's appropriately enough for today. It's a moment of reset. It's a moment of pause and reflection in the world of sustainability. I think everybody's been very, very focused on regulation, and with delays coming in regulation, that's given people some breathing space, but I think also shone a light on the fact that I think we've lost our sweet spot a little bit. We've lost the why we started looking at sustainability in the first place. We've been chasing all these compliance metrics and spending a lot of time tidying our numbers for our auditors. And businesses are taking a step back and thinking, okay, well, why are we doing sustainability? And there's a few themes that I'm consistently hearing when I'm talking to clients. The first is that, okay, let's refocus. What's the business case for doing this? Why does it make why does this help us commercially? How do we make sure our sustainability priorities are aligned with our commercial priorities? The second reason why I think it's a bit of a moment to reframe and reset is delivery is really hard, right? Businesses have realized it's much harder than we thought and more expensive than we thought to deliver on the targets we've set, whether those are climate related or on other topics. And there's a lot of noise, a lot of excitement about some companies pushing their targets back. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think it necessarily means businesses are less ambitious. I think it means now that we have better data, now that we're a little bit further down the line, people are realizing what it's going to take to get there and making sure that we have fully costed glide paths to get there. The third thing I think I'm beginning to see is, and my business focuses a lot on communication, is that there's a reframing, a refocus on commercial resilience. I think businesses are really nervous at the moment to take a stand on big issues because society is increasingly polarized, because people are worried about greenwashing. So I think when we see how brands are engaging with sustainability, we're seeing more muted green claims, a more muted palette of green claims as people are worried about greenwash. But the maybe the last theme I'd call out around this reset is, well, businesses are a bit more reluctant perhaps to talk about this, and it's much more about commercial resilience rather than sustainability as a reputation play. Consumers really care. And so I think we're starting to see much more focus on the S in ESG, on that social side, and on connecting with people. So I think, and I'm embarrassed to say this as somebody who works for a marketing agency and who works in sustainability, but I think as sustainability professionals, we've not always been great at telling stories people want to hear. I think we sometimes hide behind the jargon. And so we're seeing brands work really, really hard to connect with consumers on the issues that matter most to me. And often the story I want to hear isn't the story businesses want to tell. So I think we're actually seeing brands lean in more than ever on sustainability topics. But sustainability isn't the primary messaging. It's the secondary messaging. It's the proof point. So a great example maybe is actually one of the Super Bowl ads in the US. And the Super Bowl is the most expensive advertising slot you can buy anywhere in the world, was from Unilever's Hellmann's brand. And they had a really funny cat called Mayo Cat, who was all about, in a really funny and engaging way, helping people rescue their leftovers and make them tasty. It was about tackling food waste. It didn't feel like a sustainability campaign. It wasn't worthy. It was quite funny. And it was tackling an issue in a cost of living crisis that really, really mattered.
And great storytelling.
And it was brilliant storytelling. So, yeah.
We will keep going down the line. Sashi, you are the FCA Sustainability Director, but before that, you were an investor. Have you got examples from that role in terms of where this made a difference, where it was important?
Well, hi, everyone. And first of all, last time I had a karaoke mic, it was Karma Chameleon I was singing. So don't worry, I won't talk about that today. Yes, I mean, investors have got a big role to play. And although I'm not here as an investor anymore, I still feel that as an asset owner for many, many years. And they've got lots of stories to tell, and they want their money to be run in a very pushed way, as you know, which isn't always happening. So a good example would be in 2011 when we helped set up the diversity and the 30% club. There was a really big debate in the UK. We had 11% women on FTSE 100 boards, and there was a big debate about whether we should use exclusions or vote against and stuff like that. And what we did at Legal and General where I was at, we made sure we stayed inside the tent as one of the largest shareholders and voted against all male boards after giving them a bit of time. And that staying inside and influencing and exerting pressure, I find, is a much more important role than allowing just the 11% of companies that were doing a good job to survive. We wouldn't have got to 41% where we are now if we'd have just left the room and left it to the good people. And so we've done that. And in my role as a regulator, we have the sustainability labels, we have the anti-greenwashing rule, and a lot of this is about helping people navigate this. And I'm really glad to see people are starting to stop talking greenwashing and even a bit of green hushing. There's nothing wrong with a bit of green hushing. I'd rather do something and then tell you about it afterwards than tell you and sign up to 55 things and not actually deliver on 53 of them. So I think things are moving in the right direction. And one of our labels is called the Improver label. And why is it called that? Because we'd rather help companies improve from a position they're at and not just have these exclusionary approaches. Exclusions have a role, and I'm not saying they're not, but I think it's really important that we do that. And last but not least, I think a lot of the regulators are doing quite a good job of talking to ourselves. So the advertising standards, the CMA, and ourselves did the anti-greenwashing rule. We used the same stuff. We used the same examples. We tried to help that rather than all having a different sort of standard. And internationally, I spend a lot of time with people making sure that the rules are the same. So there is one coming out, and it's the first acronym I'm going to use, ISSB. But that is going to come in many of the jurisdictions, 60% of the world's GDP. And it means that we measure things, and hopefully for you as corporates, you'll be able to measure them, and then people can work out whether they're doing a good job on those things.
Well, we wait to see when that comes through. Ingrid, we've touched on opportunities here. Where do you see the opportunity from GFI?
So just briefly on GFI, for those of you that don't know us, we are a not-for-profit working between the public and private sector to try and understand why capital isn't being mobilised, and working between the market and government on solutions. And everything we do is very sector focused. We've got a built environment programme, road transport decarb, sustainable aviation fuel, nature program, and carbon dioxide removals. So I think the last few years of the disclosures landscape have been very helpful for firms to understand climate risk, mainstream that conversation. But what we're really seeing now amongst financial services firms we work for is hunger for opportunity. So where is the deal flow coming from? To an extent, they can help themselves. I think one of the biggest successes we've seen in the market to date has been the growth of the green mortgage market, estimated at around 9 billion annually. The majority of that's still going to properties that are already energy efficient, so a pricing advantage there. But increasingly, the thing that fascinates me is we're seeing tie-ups between banks and providers of energy performance certificates. So you can get a cashback to get your property assessed to look what retrofit options you might deploy to make your home more energy efficient. Santander and Virgin are both offering those sorts of contracts of difference, but there's something like 40 or more products in the market there as banks realise they have a role to play in working with their customers to incentivise uptake of things like solar panels, boiler upgrades and so on. So that's really positive. But across the economy, we do need to see more opportunity emerging, whether that's around cement decarbonisation or sustainable aviation fuel decarbonisation. So we're working quite closely between some of the businesses involved in that space, their investors and policymakers to see how we can create those investable frameworks. But I think the thing that excites me most actually is the number of corporates now setting up their own venture capital funds to invest in the supply chain decarbonisation that they would like to see from their current suppliers but isn't actually happening. So they're getting on with it themselves. And that's just brilliant. We need some more of that.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to mix things up a little bit more rather than just going up and down the line. Sasha, you touched on ISSB and regulation. What is the role of regulation? Can it help create value?
Well, remember, I spent a lot of my career not as a regulator and 3 and a bit years as a regulator. So I can speak with definite push that not everything needs regulation. And we know that. And so don't worry, I totally understand that. And some of the time, though, it's really interesting, like ESG ratings. We've been asked by, nearly everyone wanted us to get involved to try and help sort out things. So there's a balance. And sometimes you need a code of conduct, which the industry signed up to rather than the regulator. But having the regulator behind the scenes, making sure the code of conduct was strong enough is sometimes quite helpful. So there is a balance. But of course, this industry from when I was looking at this 15 years ago has grown up significantly, and it's now right at the front of your PLC. It's not just on the side, and therefore it needs some rules. It needs some help, and we've had to sort of get rid of some of the acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms in this world, and we have to try and push people together. There's a lot of egos as well, and I think that's been another thing where regulators have helped internationally. So I think it's really important. And then last but not least, clarify, guidance. People are going, what can I say? And you're going, well, you would be very careful about giving dividend forecasts going forward if you're the CFO. Why are you suddenly giving my net zero forecast without having a transition plan or stuff like that? So just giving people confidence that this is as good as they can do. And one example right now, we've got a consultation out which is saying forward-looking statements in prospectuses, and prospectuses are not just equities, bonds as well. What about forward-looking statements? What kind of confidence can you say something? Because I know if you're a PLC, you'd be sitting there going, what do I say going forward? What if I can't hit it? I might have to change my targets. And so a bit of comfort on what you would do with forward-looking statements is something the industry wants, and we're trying to work out how to do that.
Brilliant. Juliet, interested in your view on that. You're on a number of boards. You've set up your own company. What's the role of regulation versus company-driven measures and reporting?
I think that's a great question. I think quite often it's quite helpful, as you said, to have companies push forward with the initial ideas and try and do the discovery and then find what the roadblocks are. I spend a huge amount of time at Good Energy sort of trying to persuade government to look at greenwashing. because it was rife in the energy sector, particularly at the time. And in fact, we audited ourselves right from the beginning. We did an environmental audit back in 1999 to kind of prove to customers what we were saying was true, because we didn't really know what else to do, because there wasn't really any guidance at that point. So I think what's quite helpful is that when you're starting out on something, to allow the innovators to come up and move around, and then for government to kind of try and corral it, to bring it to some kind of movement forward. I think there are a lot of standards out there at the moment, and trying to comply with them all. I remember, so I chaired something called a Trato on-site energy, and we were a rooftop energy fund. And one of the challenges was how many of these different compliance do we look at, and how many different reporting do we do, and which ones should we choose? And I think some simplification around that would be quite nice, and maybe some sort of different levels for different sizes of company, because obviously you kind of want to encourage the small growth companies to start on their journey, but you don't want them to have to look at the levels of compliance that you're seeing at the bigger end. So there's a kind of real journey in there, and I think thinking through that journey from startup to growth to kind of large corporate, and how you can actually help those organizations evolve through the reporting would be really helpful.
And getting the scaling right, so that you're not putting too much of a burden on people as they're growing up through their size. Exactly. Focusing a little bit away from the regulation and more on the opportunity side, Ingrid, when we were preparing, you had some great examples you were talking about in the UK economy. Could you share a few with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think this venture capital corporate play is just super positive. So I'll just share a few good news stories from that. The most recent one was actually Waitrose, a 500 million fund to invest in resilient agricultural supply chains, everything from crop covers in beef farms to recycling fertilizer. Another one I love is IAG, the British Airways group, which was just fed up with BA, Airbus, BP, Shell not coming forward with solutions. So they made a 150 million investment into hydrogen electric planes, Series 3 funding, and then purchased nearly $1 billion in advanced SAF offtakes for a SAF plant that we hope will get through final investment decision this year, and actually crowded in Airbus and BP, I think, into co-investing in those companies. Another deal I love is the East Coast Cluster deal. It was done by 3 of the sort of big energy companies, but it's a story in fortitude on the financial advisory side. So I met with the lead financial arranger. They did the pitch for that deal in 2018. It was a 6-year negotiation to attract 8 billion in debt financing for the UK's first carbon capture and storage plant in the UK. So, you know, there is great stuff going on. We need to celebrate that, but obviously we need more of it.
And maybe, Hannah, are there good examples you're particularly proud of, either at WPP or with any of your clients that you're working with?
Yeah. So I always get really frustrated, Juliet, to your point, about when people see me as the compliance person coming with my clipboard, as the trade police telling people what they can't do. Because for me,
join the club.
Yeah, sustainability has always been an innovation lens, right? It's about looking at the things that are difficult for your business, or the material impacts that you have, or threats that are coming in, and figuring out how you can turn those into opportunities. And so I think maybe one of the things I've been most proud to watch within my business has been how we've been changing production, so how we physically make ads. And this was a great opportunity, a great example of turning a crisis into an opportunity, because around the same time that we set our carbon reduction targets, which included all the emissions from production, COVID happened, and we suddenly couldn't make ads anymore. You couldn't travel, and we used to travel to thousands of countries every year, and spend hours and hours, shooting footage to get the perfect light and the perfect weather. And suddenly we couldn't do any of that. And so we've been investing in virtual production. And coming at that with a sustainability lens has completely transformed the way we think about making ads. So we can use camera to cloud technology so that we can tag everything we film. So you can search for it now and you can recycle it, but also repurpose it. We've got virtual production sets, so you can shoot once and then we can now use AI to translate into different countries. So you can have one ad that's filmed once that's used in hundreds of markets around the world with all the different variations that you would need. And we can now use real-time insights to make those ads more effective and work harder for our clients. So it's working harder, more efficient, more effective for our clients and reducing emissions. And that kind of thing, I think, is really exciting. And then when I look at what our clients are doing, I mean, I came to work at WPP because I've always been a little bit obsessed with how do you shift behavior? How do you get people to actually want to live more sustainable lifestyles? And that's what advertising's always been about, right? So I was interested in how can you take that creative storytelling, that superpower, don't buy Pepsi, buy Coke, and apply it to make sustainable lifestyles more desirable. And I think, we're seeing more and more brands lean into that in really interesting and exciting ways. Maybe one of my favorite examples that we worked on recently has been the partnership between eBay and Love Island, which has made pre-loved clothes super cool. And you can see big spikes in searches for pre-loved clothes and reusing clothes every time that campaign runs. So it's how do we mainstream this? How do you scale this so it's not for the niche dark greenies?
Sasha, you want to come in?
I was just going to say, from someone who's interviewed or spoken to hundreds of CFOs, CEOs, chairmen, and still do, it's changed from, again, like you said, being that sustainability. Oh God, we need to answer that question. How are we doing it? This is part of your business. And it went first of all to the CFOs, and the CFOs, I love CFOs, but they are sometimes how much? Whereas, and again, it's all about return on capital and all that stuff. Now it's about the CEOs and thinking about the strategy and thinking about, well, it's not going fast enough. I'll set up a VC fund. And I think it's moving quite good. And I think that joint venture should be called Love Bay, eBay and Love Island.
That's brilliant. We've talked about a lot of opportunity there, which is very exciting. I think we need to talk about that more, but we probably need to acknowledge there are some challenges. And maybe, Juliet, if I turn to you first, where do you see the challenges and how might we overcome them?
It's a great question. I think one of the challenges and one of the places I spend quite a lot of time is actually quite often we talk about the E and the S. We always forget the G, and the governance side of this is incredibly powerful. And what I find really interesting is I now work with lots of quite entrepreneurial companies and some large companies at both ends. And what I always find is that small companies underestimate the power of governance. Quite often you have CEOs who don't really like boards. They're quite annoying, probably because they ask lots of questions. But there is power in governance that can help support this. And I think if you're looking at the small growth area businesses, I think there you can bring in external visions and support to a CEO. Quite often CEOs and founder groups are very focused on one particular area, and they might forget the slightly wider areas that can support their business, particularly in a resilience point of view going forwards. And then at larger organizations, I now sit on the juxtaposed, I sit on the sustainability committee and the audit committee for the Crown Estate. And I think that's an incredibly important sort of translation that needs to happen, because otherwise we do tend to talk about cost and not about benefit. And I always find it hilarious. It's like there is a cost to sustainability, but there's also a benefit, particularly if you're looking at reducing energy use. Well, then you've got reducing cost. So again, I think this language translation is still a challenge. It's not that it's not getting there, but it's more of a challenge that it should be today.
Well, as a chartered accountant and probably ex-auditor now, I love hearing about governance and the importance of boards and also the audit committees. But I think that point on language and how we talk about things is really important. Hannah, I think as you touched on, advertising is all about nudging and language. Is there anything you might add to that?
Yeah, look, I think it's really tough at the moment. How do you talk about sustainability and bring people on that journey, and not just consumers, but actually your business and your board? You know, if this is now about, if all the low-hanging fruit's gone, and this is about business model innovation and adapting to some of the impacts now also of climate change, how do you bring people on that journey in a polarized world where it's very difficult to say anything without offending as many people as you please? And so I think navigating that is really difficult. And I think the only way to navigate that is to go back to where we started this conversation, back to your why. Because, you know, there's, you know, I think uncertainty is the new normal. So we're going to see regulation change. We're going to see this polarization. There's a very volatile macro backdrop. So you can get buffeted by all of that really quickly and very quickly lose your way. You need to have your own North Star and understand, why does this matter for our business? What are our material impacts? What do our key stakeholders need from us? And use that to help you navigate through all the noise. And then I think the other thing, the other big challenge and opportunity is how much technology is going to be disrupting core business models, and how we approach sustainability. And you know, there's upsides and downsides to that. You know, I think it's revolutionizing how we work, but it comes at quite a hefty environmental and potentially social premium, and we need to understand how to manage that.
And Climate Action Week coming after London Tech Week is quite an interesting metaphor, though I do think there are both pros and cons which we need to work through. So this will be a warning to the audience to warm up. We'll move to Q&A in a couple of minutes, but just a couple of thoughts maybe from Sasha and Ingrid on, when we were preparing for this panel, we talked about the importance of collaboration. Have you got any good examples of collaboration or areas you think we should be working harder at it?
Well, I think there were many accounting standards and a lot of people were on sustainability, and we're now getting down to the Europeans with their omnibus and ISSB around the world. So we're already trying very hard to make sure there's only at some point one, because they're going to be interoperable. And I think that'll be really important. So you can just one language and materiality. Someone mentioned commerciality, but materiality. People used to always come and tell me they sold a few dolphin-friendly soaps or something, and it's like, but how many? It wasn't very important. So we've got to make sure it's about what matters to business, and not just internationally. I think the regulators here, you see the Transition Finance Council, trying to work out how do we unblock finance for transitioning to the net zero economy, and that's everyone getting involved, and everyone has to roll their sleeves up and take a little bit of a hit. And sometimes that means get rid of a rule or clarify a rule. And I think we're doing that quite a lot. And I think the government is trying very hard to get those people. And I work with Ingrid on that quite a lot. But we never do it without getting the corporates involved. I think that's quite important.
Brilliant. Ingrid.
It's absolutely critical. So I was really struck at some of the events. I went to the COP High Level Champions event, the De-risking Summit, that we're now in a phase of needing to implement change. And that means new technologies, new business models for which data may not be available. And yet we need to crowd all that private capital in. I think the numbers, the net investment numbers that the Committee on Climate Change said we need to be deploying in the UK are around 4 billion a year. That's not coming from the public sector, sorry. So it's about risk sharing. So if I look at some of the other sort of new opportunities I get excited about, one of the things I worry about is flood management in the UK. Surely this should be something that the insurers could be investing in, place-based natural flood management. I don't think anytime soon, unless the regulator massively changes how they write their policy. So what we're actually seeing is great examples of public money, the Natural Environment Investment Fund, being used to pull together coalitions of businesses, landowners, householders, and this includes people like Aviva, but also United Utilities, Anglian Water, and others, to come together to implement natural flood management measures, which actually have proven to be successful in places like Gissing, the Wyre Valley. Aviva did an analysis on this Gissing investment and said they expect a 17-to-1 return on investment in terms of avoided losses. So we're starting to prove these sorts of business models, but how do we work together to roll them out across the UK? That's going to need collaboration. Similarly, if I think about our work on green mortgages or sustainable aviation, the products that we developed on the green mortgage side to build out this 9 billion a year industry with the market were actually about education. It was like, what do you need to know about energy efficiency technologies to get comfortable in writing new policies? So developing handbooks, ways of tagging mortgages on systems, developing green home finance principles. And now the market's just building itself. Similarly, in SAF, our program's actually in its third year, and it's been a very carefully curated dialogue between the SAF sector, developers, the banks who might be lending to them, and the Department for Transport having to provide a revenue certainty mechanism to say, what do you need from that mechanism to make it bankable? What else do we need to be doing on the risk sharing side? So bringing the National Wealth Fund in, but they need to be well structured, really detailed conversations about how we fairly manage risk on both sides, so we can get these projects away with private capital and start to build up these new business models. The devil is in the detail.
The devil is always in the detail. So I promised the opportunity for questions. Have we got any brave audience members? Don't all shout. Oh, we've got one in the front row. Here it comes. Everyone else now they're going to break the ice. Everybody else get ready with your questions to pile in afterwards.
Hi. So my question is, actually for everybody, any tips on how to gain buy-in from a skeptical executive into investing in sustainability, especially in a climate of deregulation in America and Europe?
Juliet.
Yes, so it isn't straightforward, but you have to kind of understand. When I look at an executive, I go, well, sort of, what are their key objectives as individuals? What are they having to deliver in their set? So is it head of HR? Is it CFO? Who is it? And then start to break down what a sustainability investment might mean from their point of view. So sort of through an HR lens, it's all about people. And it's all about the fact that what any HR professional wants is they don't want to be constantly hiring, and they want to have a happy and effectively working workforce. So making sure they've got buy-in from the employees in the organisation and making that case very strongly. And sort of what you find is as soon as you start to look at surveys, employee surveys, make sure you slip an environmental or a social question in there to really get that feedback. And then you break down, I mean, my view is you break down each part of the organisation and see what you can do. Is it brand? Is it resilience? Is it risk strategy? Where do you impact, and do the translation so you can then persuade the executive?
Go on, Sasha.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. First of all, I do think our industry has spoken too many acronyms and speaks a language that's very different to business. So first thing is just speak about IRRs, MPVs, return on capital, that sort of stuff. Secondly, employees. You touched on it, but the employee retention, you've probably got people inside your firm who've got a network together who want this to happen. Talent, increasing talent. If you're not doing this, what you're doing. And then last of all, if your competitors are doing this, I mean, the largest IPO in the world this year was an EV battery company in Hong Kong. It wasn't touted as a climate change thing. It's just a business that's going to grow around the world because that technology is taking off. So just saying that's the way that it's going. What are we doing about this? And we need to make sure that we've got R&D and things like that in this area.
Hannah, do you want to?
Yeah. You've got to make it work for them. So you've got to solve their most material issue and not yours. Otherwise, you end up languishing at the bottom of their to-do list, making them feel like low-level guilt, and that's not a good vibe. And so really spend some time understanding what's keeping them awake at night so that you can align. And sometimes that means it's not your investment, actually. It's not exactly the project you envisaged. It's about really partnering and understanding how this can solve a commercial challenge and a sustainability challenge at the same time. So I think, yeah, solve their problem, not your problem. Sometimes that means being flexible in what the end game looks like.
Ingrid, do you want to complete the set of thoughts?
Well, I've tended to always work for quite progressive firms, so it's been less of an issue. But I can say this is actually where regulation is your friend. So cast around for relevant regulation.
I am a friend.
That is something that will be coming down the line that they need to be thinking of. And I think there's plenty of that around at the moment you can seize on.
Brilliant. Have we got any? We've got a question in the middle. Oh, we've got loads. So after this one, then there's one over here, and then a couple. But maybe if we take this one, and then while the panel are answering, we'll go over this way.
So each of you are in the public eye, and there's a lot of focus on kind of post greenwashing and more towards the trust that your clients have in you. How much do you think this reset, as you've all kind of highlighted, will hinge on more verification of the facts of what money managers, companies, et cetera, are promising versus trust me?
Well, as someone who works in an audit firm, I always like the word verification, but there is some self-interest. So I will go on.
Obviously,
Sash.
one of the things I'm looking for, and that's what. So I also work for the International Securities Regulator, which is all of the regulators around the world on securities, is going from here's my survey that says X, which is your trust me, to I need this to be signed off by the audit committee and start with limited assurance and then reasonable assurance, so that I can then make investment decisions based on these numbers being fit for purpose. So that is coming all around the world. There will be less metrics, but that's good, actually. Sometimes, who wants 37,000 metrics? How many metrics? I mean, my brain's quite small. I can't focus on that. So I think getting the 25 metrics that matters to an oil and gas company and making sure that they're not just assured, but then they can be comparable with someone else is extremely important. And that is the focus of all of this stuff that's going on with Europe and ISSB across the world. And of course, that's good news for the auditors.
I always think about it as if you've got to go on the Today program and have some very difficult questions answered. And then you think about what do you need to be able to answer those questions. It might be verification. It might be testimonies from customers. There may be a range of pieces that you need. But just put yourself in a very difficult position, and then you'll know what you need.
And can I also look, greenwashing is really bad for business, right? And I don't think anybody sets out deliberately to greenwash because it erodes trust.
I might disagree on that.
I might as well a bit.
But I think
Consequences are quite high.
Yeah, exactly. It erodes trust really, really quickly. And it's actually really ineffective communication. It leads to confusion. People don't know what it is you want them to do with your product or what it is you're saying about your product. It's bad communication. So effective communications, I think verification is one approach and certification is another. I think you need a blend. But again, I think you need to go back to that question of why. What is it you're trying to communicate and how do you do that in the most effective way possible? And it is something we can help you with.
Brilliant. Ingrid, did you want to add anything?
So I would actually say in financial markets, this is an issue. Going back to the green mortgages, sorry to bang on about that as a topic, but one of the first things we heard from the banks was concern about being called out for greenwashing, which is why we developed the Green Home Finance Principles. But I think as the market has matured, they're more sort of confident in what they're doing. So we've got something like 50% alignment with those standards now. But just chatting to some of the bankers in particular about some of the sustainability-linked loans and sustainability-linked bond market, I think there is a growing sense that with concerns about requirements for verification reporting, it's all just getting a bit too faffy and expensive, and that market will fall away And it's also been interesting, some of these really interesting deals I talked about earlier, the East Coast Cluster deal. I didn't realize there were 30 banks in that deal. It was oversubscribed, it was underwritten by expert insurers as well as government. Nobody is talking about it because I think there is more green hushing going on than we might want. That disappoints me because actually we need to be talking about these deals and these models more, but it's also heartening in that people are just getting on with things. So I think it's a very mixed bag currently.
It is good that people are getting on and doing it. Now, we had several other questions. Maybe the gentleman with the mic.
Hi, Juliet, you mentioned that you thought governance was a powerful tool, but executives were sometimes skeptical. Any success stories on how you convince a skeptical executive beyond just saying, ISSB requires you to have climate governance?
I think you have to do. I mean, it's a really interesting role, having stepped out of being an executive to being a non-executive, because essentially you have no power, and your power is your ability to persuade and to influence. And I think you have to become. I see a board member as a critical friend, so I see that you are their friend, but you are also critical. That's a mixed metaphor there, but basically what you are there to do is to keep pushing. And I think if you can show that the company becomes more successful as a result of the work that you do, and that you lean in when needed as you need to persuade, occasionally you need to have a couple of boardroom reshuffles potentially. I've seen, but my experience is I love working with CEOs. I was one, and now I see lots of different styles of different CEOs, and persuading them and working with them. Quite often, the door's completely open. You just need to help them do the explanation that we were talking about. Is about talking to the rest of the team. CFOs are still the toughest to persuade, always. Audit committees are still the toughest places to be from a governance point of view. But you support and you help lend your voice to how do you translate the work that they're doing into the rest of the business and the commerciality side of it.
Do any of the other panel want to come in?
I suppose as someone who ran a governance team at one of the largest asset managers in the world for a long time, I would say governance is important. But obviously it's different with smaller companies. It takes a time and you have to have different, because again, they'll talk about the cost. But look at how companies growing pains when they try and grow if they don't have that. And then the obvious point, we've seen enough of the scandals, we've seen all of the problems that we've had. Absolute power corrupts always. I think Lord Acton said that in 1837. That's why you have an audit committee. That's why you have checks and balances. It's quite good to challenge each other before you make a very expensive mistake.
Go on, Hannah.
I have a practical tip. So we have a sustainability committee and an audit committee, and actually they often meet jointly on sustainability topics. Engage before you're in the room. So I spend quite a lot of time with my sustainability committee chair ahead of meetings. Make sure that you're aligned, and they can be a very, very helpful ally when you're trying to get the rest of the management team bought in. And also I would say uncomfortable conversations can be helpful. That challenge is really helpful, and you do get to a stronger place.
Often they're the best conversations if they're done in the right way. I am getting the 5-minute warning, and I wanted to give us each maybe 1 minute for any final thoughts, hints and tips, and maybe coming the other way down the line this time. So Ingrid, if you have any final thoughts, takeaways for the audience today.
Well, I think the other one to flag is obviously the physical risk that we're now seeing in the environment. I think that's really focusing mind. So we've talked a lot about mitigation, but actually we're seeing more resilience-focused investment happening, I think, as a result of the changing climate. And when you start to really kind of nail down what is happening there, the future risk coming down the line, it does actually help make the case for mitigation now we're finding. So worth bringing that perspective into.
Brilliant. Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, even in, quite rightly in places like America, when we talk about physical risks, there are places where insurance is really hard to get. That's a business decision because they don't think they're going to get their money back. So talking about it in that sense is much better than talking about it in maybe using sustainability terms. And we see that, and I see that all the time. And they're doing some amazing things and spending lots of money. They don't call it climate adaptation. I don't care what they call it. They're doing it, and they're having to do it to solve the problems they have. We have that in the UK. Network Rail spending a fortune on drainage engineers and new jobs. And that's, again, it's just about because when it floods really hard, and therefore they have to do this. So I think we just used to need the language of business, which is what we're trying to talk about. And then last but not least, I'm glad someone mentioned I don't like trust me numbers. Use assured metrics, and then you also feel much better if you're on the Today program that you're going to be able to answer it and feel confident. And your boss, your chairman, whoever it is going to be able to say, I can back that up with real figures, which is an assured number.
Brilliant. Hannah?
I think if we're reframing sustainability, it's not just about reframing it for your business. It's about maybe reframing it for ourselves as sustainability practitioners. Like, get curious, really listen to why the naysayers are gaining traction. Try and understand what the commercial challenges in the businesses are and how you can offer up sustainability as a solution rather than another big, scary, daunting problem that you're asking the business to solve. So get curious, really get back to that commercial why. And then I think we've never ever had more data and insight, and technology can really help with that. So yes to verified and assured metrics, but not just to present externally. Really mine them for insight. How can all the energy numbers you've got, how can you help the business see itself differently? How can you provide real commercial insight and be the person that everybody wants at the table because you've got a solutions mindset?
Brilliant. Juliet?
My view is that sustainability is not an add-on. It's absolutely sort of interwoven into a business, as is the social side. And I think if you really want to build a resilient business, which I think, given the external context that we now exist in, resilient businesses are probably going to be more attractive for investors than necessarily high growth businesses right now, then actually making sure that those businesses are well run from a risk point of view, and that includes all types of risks around sustainability and social, is key. And I think just looking back at the industry I used to operate in, so electricity supply businesses over the last 20 years, we've probably had over 100, maybe 120. There are only 2 left of the original energy supply businesses. One is Good Energy, obviously. The other one is another company, I won't mention their name, but they both happen to be sustainably led organizations.
That's amazing. Well, I don't want to run the panel longer than we're allowed. I'd like to say a big thank you to Hannah, Sasha, Ingrid and Juliet. Lots of thought to chew on there. You'll see on the screen there is the QR code for our Reframing Sustainability report and also the event. It's really encouraging to think about actually how much progress is being made, how much opportunity is there, and how we can work together to make the most of that. So thank you.